Welcome back to another episode of 40 Facts about the 40K universe. I am your host Gersh1 and you are watching One Mind Syndicate. Today we finalize Captain Lysander's story as we get into part 4. So let's get into 40 facts about Captain Lysander. The return of Lysander's strike force to Phalanx should have been a time of sober celebration, but such was not to be. Shortly after the Storm of Wrath had taken formation with the rest of the Imperial Fist fleet, Sergeant Garradon had requested a private audience with Vladimir Pugh, and thereby laid bare the story of the Third Company's near demise. Such a meeting was not altogether unusual amongst the Imperial Fists, for the warriors of the chapter had ever held one another to the highest standards of discipline. Nevertheless, this was not a step that Garradon took lightly. For a sergeant to seek censure of a captain was unusual enough. To demand it of an honored hero like Lysander, there would be no good outcome from such a challenge. It said much of Garradon's unease at the situation that he had 3 times sought Lysander out during the homeward voyage. He had hoped to see some element of regret from the captain, some sign that the follies of Taladorn would not occur again. On each occasion, Garradon was angrily dismissed, with Lysander threatening to strip the sergeant off his rank if he persisted. Garradon was perceptive enough to recognize that he was not the true target of the captain's anger, but wise enough to realize that matters had progressed beyond his ability to rectify. Pugh was greatly displeased. His anger stemmed not from the sergeant's honesty. Indeed, he commended Garradon for speaking on the matter. Nor was the rendition of the Battle of Taladorn entirely new to him. Lysander had already given his account of the engagement, a report that had been honest in every detail, from his bold planet strike through to his repeated refusal of assistance. What concerned Pugh was the fact that Lysander showed no sign of remorse at the outcome his decisions had led to. The first captain cared only that the Iron Warriors had been defeated and that the world returned to the Imperial fold. Pugh found this attitude dangerous. There had been triumph at Taladorn, true enough, but bought with such needless sacrifice that another dozen such victories would see the glorious tradition of the Imperial Fist ended altogether. Too often had the blood of Dorn guided his children down such a path. The invaders, to name but one of the Imperial Fist's successors, ever risked annihilation because of their stubborn refusal to back away from the unwinnable. Pugh knew that many of the Imperial Fist captains looked to Lysander for example, rather to himself, which could become problematic if the first captain's deeds were unchallenged. After several days of silent meditation, and with heavy heart, Pugh convened the chapter council to judge Lysander's conduct. Thus did the other 8 surviving captains of the Imperial Fist convene in the shadow-shrouded cloister of remembrance, to determine if pride rather than duty had come to rule Lysander's actions. This was an old tradition. The captains affirmed their obligation beneath the gaze of the honored dead. Golden statues, each many times the height of a man, stood silent in the tiered alcoves that lay around the chamber's circular perimeter. It had been 1,000 years since the last statue was raised, and a millennium more could march by before the honor was again bestowed. There was no furnishing in the cloister of remembrance, no seat upon which the captains could rest, and no council table to pound in support. Each captain took his place at the room's perimeter, while Pugh, as head of the council, stood in the center, pacing to address each of his brothers as he needed. Pugh had ordered Garradon's presence. The sergeant now stood in the space set aside for the Third Company's captain. He was soon called upon as the witness to Lysander's part in his company's near demise. Garradon addressed the assembly calmly, for his anger had cooled with the passing of weeks. Captain Hagen, commander of the 5th Company, was another matter. He had dwelt greatly on events and come to realize that his own company, though scared during the Taladorn planet strike, could have easily have suffered in the Third's stead. Anger bubbled beneath his otherwise clinical account. Hagen gave projections of what would have happened had Lysander not divided the strike force's company, and if he had not begun the planet strike until the Ultramarines and Blood Angels could have provided support. Yet it was Lysander's own testimony that was more damning in Pugh's eyes, albeit unintentionally. The first captain spoke of the Imperial Fist's tradition of sacrifice, of their duty to crush the work of traitors wherever they took root. There could not be, he maintained, too high a price to pay in pursuit of this cause. The Iron Warriors were the Imperial Fist's burden to bear, and their honor to defeat. Without looking at Garradon, Lysander scorned the idea that assistance had ever been acquired, and moreover suggested that the Ultramarines' arrival had in fact created the distraction which allowed Warsmith Shantu to escape. As Lysander spoke, Pugh marked the approving expressions and nods of affirmation given by fully half of the captains present. As a mere acting captain, Garradon had no votes upon the council. Lysander's words and demeanor had spoken to the Imperial Fist's selflessness and self-reliant tradition, and those captains with whom such things resonated strongest were inclined to overlook where the path had led them. Pugh had hoped to salvage some of the unity from Teledorn by demoting Lysander, making him an example of pride gone awry, the lesson of generations to come. The chapter master was certain that the first captain would have recovered from such a blow, and would have even emerged the stronger of it. Such a thing was impossible now. With the chapter council so evenly divided, an obvious disapproval would create division. On the other hand, to not act would drive a wedge between Lysander and those captains who disapproved of his actions at Teledorn. As chapter master, Pugh did not need the consent of his captains to make a decision, but he had long ago learned that leadership was more effective when widely subtle. Dorn, for all his fortitude, had understood that concept, and now Pugh resolved to emulate his forefather. Rather than put the matter to vote, Pugh decreed that Lysander would set aside his duties as first captain for a time, and take Vogan's place as commander of the battered Third Company. There was criticism in that course of action, for it was an obvious demotion. However, Pugh pointed out that there was honor as well, and reminded that all that were present that he could think of no one better to place to rebuild the shattered company from their current lamented state. Lysander's skill as a drill master had not faded since his days as a sergeant, and there would be much work for him to rebuild the Third. It was one thing to draft replacements from the reserve companies to replenish the Third's losses. It was another thing entirely to accept those warriors to act as a single unit from the very start. Pugh furthermore ordered the Sergeant Julin would assume command of the First Company until such time as Lysander's task was completed, though all noted that the chapter master set no timescale under which he expected this to be achieved. Garradon frowned at his chapter master's words, but said nothing. He had hoped that the temporary command of the Third would become permanent, but was enraged that it would pass on to the very man responsible for its near destruction. Even Garradon's status as sergeant was now in doubt, for he recalled that too well that his last conversation with his new captain had ended with a threat of sanction. For this part, Lysander was careful to maintain even tones as he accepted his chapter master's judgment. Moreover, he thanked Pugh for the opportunity to forge the Third Company in battle against the Iron Warriors as he himself had been forged. Shantu, Lysander insisted, would at last be brought to account for his crimes. Lysander's expression stiffened noticeably when Pugh informed him that the Third would not be assigned to pursue the Iron Warriors. Rather, they would persecute a new campaign, a crusade of thunder against the orcs of Magor Rith, whose threat had been growing for several years. Against these new foes, the Third Company would hone their skills and prove themselves worthy of the tradition they bore. Lysander looked around the cloister for support, but none he found. Without a word, he strode from the room and into his new future as captain of the Third. With Pugh's decision, momentum for the Crusade of Thunder began to grow. However, Lysander's command as yet consisted only of some 30 warriors and the battle barge Storm of Wrath. It was the foundation of a mighty force, but little more. The third's loss would have to be replenished before the campaign could truly start. 7 sergeants had been lost in Taladorn, and for the most part, their replacements were chosen from those brothers who had survived the battle. Sergeant Garridon was surprised when Lysander consulted him about which of the Third Company's warriors were most suitable for promotion. As with almost every word that passed between the two at the time, the conversations were stilt and awkward, with both men making a poor show of hiding their mutual dislike. Nevertheless, Garridon experienced the first spark of a grudging respect for his new captain, if only for the professionalism with which he took his new duty. This grew further when Lysander confirmed that he was content for Garridon to remain in position as Squad Primus Sergeant, and even offered a grudging apology for the previously threatened demotion. Garridon took both of these things with much the same ill grace as they were offered. In the end, several of the vacant sergeant positions were filled by survivors of Taladorn, 2 by sergeants from the 7th Company, and 1 by the respected Sergeant Odin, a 1st Company veteran. With the appointments determined, the replenishment draft began. Many of the 3rd Company's new warriors, some 60 battle brothers in all, came from the reserve companies. Captain Joan, 7th Company, which had itself recently returned from a campaign amongst the Ghoul Stars, contributed almost 40 tactical marines, which, at Lysander's instruction, were divided amongst the battle-worn squads. No unit would be manned entirely by the less experienced warriors of the reserve companies. The remaining inductees were scouts that Lysander personally selected from the 10th Company. He took only the most promising recruits, those that the Captain Monteith considered ready to make the transition to full battle brother. These, like the inductees from the reserves, were spread throughout the company. All told, the flurry of drafting and reassignment brought the 3rd Company's roster up to its official strength of 105 battle brothers, plus support personnel and transport crew. Chaplain Marvok, preserved from injury on Taladorn by the Emperor's grace, and by the force field within his Rosarius, relished his company's restoration. He prowled the Storm of Wrath's decks in search of infractions performed by battle brothers used to the lax ways of the chapter's other chaplains, who Marvok mistrusted for the weakness he imagined them to possess. Brother Conrath, preserved from a second death by his armored sarcophagus, had been carefully restored to full function by the chapter's tech marines. He was joined by another dreadnought, Brother McCann, who had been awoken from his slumber specifically to lend his might to the crusade. Upon learning that McCann had once been Lysander's sergeant, Garridon wondered whether Pugh's command stemmed from the desire to allow the captain an old comrade, or because the chapter master believed that McCann's influence would change Lysander's stubbornness. With the ranks of the 3rd Company filled, Lysander requested and received the honor guard of the 1st Company Terminators. He also requisitioned some 30 Centurion warsuits, several Vindicators, a Predator battle tank, and the Land Raider Legend of Roma. Not content with that, he then convinced Captain Monthius to assign 3 of his scout squads to the strike force, the Captain Hagen to part with 3 of the 5th Company's precious Storm Talon gunships. Only when the last of these attack crafts were secured aboard the Storm of Wrath did Lysander at last order the battle barge to break formation with phalanx and lead out into the tides of the warp. The Crusade of Thunder had begun, but none of those who set out upon the voyage knew where it would end. Captain Lysander utilizes the superb protection of the master-crafted Indominus pattern Terminator armor to lead the veterans of the Imperial Fist 1st Company in dealing deadly melee combat and boarding actions. Lysander wields the Fist of Dorn, which is the legendary master-crafted thunderhammer traditionally wielded by the captain of the Imperial Fist's 1st Company. The weapon is shaped to resemble the gauntlet fist that is holding each end of the Warhammer. The arcane technologies built into the Fist of Dorn allow it to strike with far more powerful blows than any other of the normal thunder hammers, and the weapon was designed to be most effective when used to assault heavy armored vehicles and fortifications. Lysander carries a storm shield, which is a large and heavy shield that can house extensive webs of field generation circuitry in their thick plating. The shield's generated energy can fend off bullets and blasts from afar, while the physical shield itself protects against melee attacks. Captain Lysander's mighty storm shield bears the heraldry of his chapter and includes multiple purity seals and a teleporter Homer. And those were 40 facts about Captain Lysander, the awesome HQ of the Imperial Fists. You guys will see this guy in battle reports to come. He is awesome. Now that I've finished the lore, of course I'm going to paint him, and he's going to become part of my Imperial Fist army. So please subscribe to the channel for you guys to get those battle reports in the future. And please comment down below and let the Sound Alchemist know what type of special character you guys want to hear about next. He's going to be doing the individual lores on characters in the Warhammer 40K universe. So please do that. Don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe, and I'll catch you in the next episode. This was Gersh1 with One Mind Syndicate, signing out.